My dearest listener, prepare yourself for a tale not of grand kingdoms and shining knights, but of the embers that glow in the deepest dark. This is a story of love found in the shadow of the pyre, of a heart that refused to be consumed, and of a destiny written in smoke and tears. It begins, as all such stories must, in a time when God's love was a fearsome thing and the world held its breath. Friends, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new audiobook, and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you in advance. The Flames of Innocence. Prologue. The air of Europe was thick with prayer and panic. In 1,000 villages nestled in the folds of misty hills, fear was a more constant companion than the sun. It was a seasoning in the daily bread, a chill in the summer breeze. From the cobbled squares of bustling towns to the humblest of hamlets, the scent was always the same, a perfume of despair carried on the wind, the smell of charred wood and something darker, something sweet and terrible. The fires of purity burned day and night, pyres built not for warmth, but for warning. Their glow painted the faces of the gathered crowds in flickering oranges and reds, transforming pious expressions into masks of demonic glee or abject terror. From pulpits of stone and wood, priests with voices of grinding granite preached of a devil that lurked in a healing poultice, in a successful harvest, in the beauty of a woman who aged too gracefully. And beneath the sermons, beneath the crackle of the flames, lay a silence more deafening than any bell, the silence of neighbors who would not meet each other's eyes, of children who learned to swallow their questions, of a world that had learned the ultimate cost of a whispered word. It was in this world, where faith ruled over reason and the Holy Inquisition hunted shadows of sin, that a story of impossible love and unyielding spirit was about to be kindled. Part 1. The Pyre. The de Varon estate was an island of grace in a sea of suspicion. Its ancient stones, weathered to a soft gray, stood not as a fortress, but as a promise of order and beauty. Within its walls, Lord Alaric de Varon ruled with a hand that was both just and gentle. His was an old name, one built on honor and tempered by reason, a beacon in these increasingly unreasonable times. His hair was touched with silver at the temples, a map of his 40-odd years of stewardship, but his eyes, the color of a summer sky, held a warmth that could disarm any tension. His wife, Isabella, was the estate's very soul. To say she was beautiful was to say the moon was merely bright. It was a truth that failed to capture her essence. Her beauty was a quiet, profound thing, rooted in the graceful line of her neck, the intelligence in her dark, observant eyes, and a serenity that seemed to calm the very air around her. She had a knowledge of herbs that could ease a fevered brow and a way with animals that saw even the wildest hawk come to her call, gifts that were once celebrated, but now, in these fearful days, were mentioned only in hushed tones. And then there was Elena. At 17, she was the perfect blend of her parents, her father's fair hair that fell in waves like spun honey, and her mother's dark, expressive eyes, full of a quick wit and a fiercer passion than her slender frame suggested. She spent her days in the sun-drenched library, riding through their wooded lands, or sitting at her mother's feet, learning the old ways, the secret languages of nature that had been passed down through the women of Isabella's line. The crack in this perfect world came in the form of Count Valerius Marcellin. Once he and Alaric had been boys together, their friendship forged in childhood adventures. But where Alaric's heart had grown into honor, Valerius's had curdled into ambition and a bitter, consuming envy. A failed business venture, which Alaric had wisely withdrawn from, had left Valerius near ruin. He saw Alaric's prosperity not as the result of sound judgment, but as a personal insult. And he coveted Isabella with a hunger that had long since crossed the line from desire to obsession. The denunciation came on a day when the sky was the color of lead. Valerius did not come himself. His words were delivered by the newly arrived inquisitor, a man named Ignatius, whose face was all severe angles and whose eyes were chips of flint. The accusation was formal, venomous, and precise. It spoke of Isabella's uncanny healing, her way with creatures, the strange vitality that clung to her. It wove a tapestry of heresy from the threads of her gentlest acts. There was no trial, not truly. Reason was a ghost in that courtroom. Alaric's furious protests were dismissed as a husband's blinded loyalty. Elena's desperate pleas were the wails of a child corrupted by a witch's blood. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. The day of the execution dawned bright and cruel, the sun shining as if in mockery. The town square was packed. A sea of faces turned towards the platform where the pyre stood, a grotesque sculpture of wood and straw. Elena was held fast between two guards, her world narrowed to the sight of her mother, back straight and head held high, being led up the steps. Isabella's gaze found them, her husband, her daughter. There was no fear in her eyes, only a profound, heartbreaking love and a warning. A warning to be silent, to survive. Alaric's face was a mask of shattered stone. He mouthed words to her, words of love, words of apology, but the roar of the crowd swallowed them whole. The torch was set. The flames, hesitant at first, began to lick greedily at the dry wood. They climbed, weaving a cage of fire and heat around Isabella. She did not scream. She looked at her family until the very end, a beacon of grace in the inferno. The scent of smoke, once the comforting smell of their hearth, now carried the essence of Elena's soul, burning away her childhood in that terrible, cleansing fire. As the flames reached their zenith, a figure on the edge of the crowd caught Elena's eye. A woman, clad head to toe in unrelenting black, her face pale and ageless, her eyes holding a knowledge that seemed to pierce through the smoke and the chaos. She held Elena's gaze for a long moment, then melted back into the throng, a shadow among shadows. Lord Alaric was taken that very night. The charge was heresy for defending his wife. His execution was swift, a private beheading within the confines of the castle keep, denying Elena even the terrible closure of witnessing his end. In the space of a single, smoke-choked week, Elena de Veron, heiress to a legacy of honor and love, became an orphan, a pauper, and a creature of immense interest to the Holy Office. Her name was now a whisper, a footnote to a scandal. And it was decided, by the cold, impersonal machinery of the church and the state, that her soul required saving. She was to be sent to the convent of the Silent Sorrows, a remote house of God hidden high in the unforgiving mountains, a place where the world and its memories could not reach her. As the heavy gates of the only home she had ever known clanged shut behind her, and the carriage bearing the de Veron crest was commandeered by the crown, Elena was thrust into a rattling cart, her few possessions in a small sack. She did not look back. There was nothing left to see. The girl who had laughed in the sun-drenched meadows was gone, and in her place was a vessel of grief, rattling towards a future of shadows and silence, the phantom scent of smoke her only companion. Part 2. The Convent of Silent Sorrows. The journey to the mountains was a slow, physical unraveling of the world Elena had known. The lush, rolling hills of her home gave way to jagged, granite teeth biting at a sky that grew colder and more gray with each passing league. The air, once soft with the scent of earth and blooming heather, turned thin and sharp, carrying the bite of frost and the distant echo of avalanches. The cart, little more than a wooden cage on wheels, jolted and swayed over roads that were scarcely more than goat tracks, each lurch of fresh agony against the bruise of her soul. Her escort was a brother Anselm, a man of few words and fewer expressions, whose piety was as rigid and cold as the mountain peaks. He offered no comfort, only mumbled prayers and wary glances, as if her corrupted blood might somehow taint him through proximity. Elena huddled in the corner of the cart, her fine wool cloak, now her only possession of value, drawn tightly around her. She did not cry. The tears had been burned out of her in the square. Instead, a numbness had taken root, a thick, insulating ice that encased her heart. She watched the world pass by as if through a pane of smoked glass, distant and untouchable. After days that bled into one another in a haze of cold and exhaustion, they arrived. The Convent of the Silent Sorrows was not so much built into the mountain as it was clawed from it. A stark, formidable structure of dark stone, it huddled against a cliff face as if seeking protection from the very elements it was built to endure. No graceful spires reached for the heavens here, only squat, formidable towers and narrow, slit-like windows that seemed to watch their approach with a stony indifference. A high wall, slick with damp moss and lichen, encircled the complex, and the great oak gate that groaned open to admit them looked as though it could withstand a siege. The world inside was as silent as the name promised. The courtyard was a barren expanse of flagstones, swept clean by a bitter wind that whistled through the cloisters. The only sounds were the distant, rhythmic chant of the divine office from the chapel and the whisper of rough-spun wool habits against stone floors. The air smelled of old incense, damp stone, and a peculiar, dusty emptiness. She was presented to the Mother Superior, Abbess Heloise. The woman was tall and gaunt, her face a landscape of severe lines carved by decades of austerity. Her hands, folded on the desk before her, were long and pale, the bones starkly visible beneath the skin. Her eyes, the color of a winter storm, assessed Elena without a flicker of warmth. "You are Elena," she stated, her voice low and resonant, filling the small, sparsely furnished room. It was not a question. "You have been sent here to atone, to pray, and to forget the world that has spoiled you. Here, you will find no vanity, no sin, no questions. You will obey our rule. You will work. You will be silent. Your past is a ghost. Do not feed it. Is that understood?" Elena merely nodded, her throat too tight for words. This was to be her life. A living entombment. She was given a novice's rough, gray habit, a straw-filled pallet in a cell so small she could touch both walls with her arms outstretched, and a new name. She was now Sister Evangeline. The name felt like a shroud, burying Elena de Veron deeper with every syllable. The days fell into a brutal, monotonous rhythm governed by the canonical hours. Matins in the dead of night, lauds at dawn, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. The bells tore sleep and life into regimented fragments. In between, there was work. Elena was assigned to the scriptorium, a frigid room where she and other silent women spent hours hunched over parchments, copying psalms and devotional texts. The work was meticulous, mind-numbing, a perfect tool for crushing wayward thoughts. Her fingers grew stiff with cold, the ink staining her skin a permanent, bluish black. She was a ghost among ghosts. The other novices and sisters moved through the corridors with downcast eyes, their faces pale, placid ovals of resignation. They were daughters of disgraced nobles, widows with inconvenient pasts, women who had spoken too freely or loved too boldly. The convent was their collective penance. The one crack in this wall of silence, the single source of warmth in the pervasive chill, was Sister Amara. Elena first noticed her in the refectory. While the others ate their meager portions of broth and hard bread with a studied focus on their bowls, Amara's eyes would occasionally lift, flickering around the room with a lively, intelligent curiosity. She was perhaps a year or two older than Elena, with a face that refused to be plain despite the severe framing of her wimple. Her features were delicate, her skin the color of rich cream, and her eyes, a warm, liquid brown, held a light that the convent's gloom had not yet managed to extinguish. Their first true interaction came in the herb garden, a walled patch of earth that was Elena's other duty. It was Amara's domain. She was the convent's infirmeress, possessing a knowledge of plants and healing that echoed, with a painful twinge, Isabella's own gifts. Elena was struggling to identify a particular weed from a seedling of lavender, her frustration a hot, tight knot in her chest. A shadow fell over her. "That one is feverfew," a soft voice said. "The other is a thistle. You must pull it up by the roots, or it will come back stronger." Elena looked up into Amara's kind eyes. She simply nodded, her own voice a stranger to her. Amara knelt beside her, her movements graceful and efficient. "You are the new one. From the lowlands." It was not an accusation, merely an observation. She began to work alongside Elena, her hands deftly tending the plants. "The soil here is stubborn," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, a secret shared between them. "But it teaches patience. And see, even here, things grow. Beautiful things." She pointed to a cluster of edelweiss, its white, star-shaped flowers blooming defiantly in a crack between the stones of the wall. Elena felt something shift inside her, a tiny, almost imperceptible thawing of the ice around her heart. It was the first time anyone had spoken to her not as a sinner or a ghost, but as a person. Their friendship, born in that silent garden, grew in the hidden corners of the convent. A brush of hands as they passed in a corridor. A shared glance during the interminable services. A flicker of understanding in a world of blank faces. They developed a silent language of their own, a tap on the floor, the placement of a book, a certain way of breathing that allowed them to communicate under the watchful eyes of the abbess and the ever-present Dar Sister Bernadette, the convent's disciplinarian. Amara began to seek her out in the scriptorium, correcting her Latin with a finger gently tracing the letters on the parchment, her touch a brand of fire on Elena's cold skin. She would leave small, illicit gifts on Elena's palate, a sprig of rosemary for remembrance, a perfectly formed pine cone, a stolen honey cake from the kitchen. One evening, during a rare moment of solitude in the garden under a canopy of emerging stars, Amara spoke of her own past. She had been promised to a cruel, old baron by her family. On the eve of her wedding, she had cut her hair and fled, seeking sanctuary. "They would have broken me," she whispered, her breath a white plume in the cold air. "Here, I may be a prisoner, but my soul is my own." Elena, emboldened by the darkness and the proximity of this kindred spirit, found her own voice, rusty and hesitant. She spoke of her mother, not of the pyre, but of her laughter, her knowledge of the stars, the way she could calm a frightened foal. She spoke of her father's love of history, of the smell of his library. The words were a release, a painful, necessary bleeding of a wound. Amara listened, her hand finding Elena's in the darkness. Their fingers laced together, a simple, profound act that sent a shock of warmth through Elena's entire being. It was a connection, a lifeline. In Amara's tender gaze and quiet strength, Elena's heart, for the first time since the smoke and the loss, began to feel a fragile, tentative warmth again. It was a dangerous feeling, a flickering candle in a room full of gunpowder, but it was the most alive she had felt in a year. It was in this state of emotional awakening, her senses newly raw and open to the world, that she first saw Lucian. Part 3. A heart divided, a path revealed. His arrival was announced not by sound, but by a shift in the atmosphere of the courtyard. It was a day of relentless, fine rain, the kind that soaked through wool and settled deep into the bones. Elena and Amara were hauling a heavy sack of milled grain from the storehouse to the kitchen, their heads bowed against the damp, their world reduced to the slick gray stones at their feet and the shared strain on the burlap. The groan of the main gate was a familiar noise, a weekly event that signaled supplies from the village in the valley below. Usually, it was old Matthias, a man as gnarled and silent as the mountain oaks, who drove the cart. But today, when Elena chanced to glance upwards, her breath caught in her throat. A young man stood holding the bridle of the lead horse, his dark hair plastered to his forehead by the rain. He was tall and lean, his shoulders broad beneath a simple, homespun tunic. It was his face, however, that held her captive. It was not classically handsome in the way of the painted courtiers she remembered from her father's halls. It was a face of angles and quiet strength, with a firm jaw and a mouth that seemed etched with a natural solemnity. But his eyes were the color of the forest after a storm, a deep, clear gray-green, and they held a startling gentleness as he spoke a soft word to the skittish horse, his large, capable hand stroking its neck. He looked up, and for a single, suspended moment, his gaze swept across the courtyard and met Elena's. It was not the leering appraisal of Valerius Marcellin's men, nor the pious dismissal of Brother Anselm. It was a look of simple, human recognition. He saw a young woman straining under a heavy load in the rain, and in his eyes, she saw a flicker of shared hardship, of understanding. Then, just as quickly, he dropped his gaze, his posture becoming deferential as Sister Bernadette emerged from the cloister to oversee the unloading. Elena felt a heat rush to her cheeks that had nothing to do with her exertion. She quickly looked away, her heart hammering a strange, frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Elena!" Amara's whisper was urgent beside her. "What is it?" "Nothing," Elena murmured, hoisting her end of the sack with renewed vigor. "It's heavy, that's all." But it was not nothing. The image of the stable hand, Lucien, as she would later learn his name, was seared behind her eyelids. His gentle eyes and quiet strength had awakened something fierce and alive in her, something that the convent's silence had not been able to fully quell. It was a different feeling from the tender, soul-deep connection she shared with Amara. This was a pull, a raw, physical longing for sunlight and freedom that he, in his simple, earthy presence, seemed to embody. A forbidden triangle of love began to unfold within the convent's stone heart, as fragile and hidden as a candle flame cupped against the wind. With Amara, it was a world of whispered intimacies. They found moments in the shadowy recesses of the chapel after Vespers, their hands seeking each other in the dark, fingers lacing together in a silent vow. They met in the scriptorium late at night, by the light of a single, guttering candle, their heads bent close together over a single page of illuminated manuscript, their shoulders touching, sharing breaths and stolen confidences. Amara's love was a sanctuary, a balm for the deep, weeping wound of Elena's past. It was understanding, it was shared pain, it was a quiet rebellion of the spirit. With Lucien, it was a series of fleeting, electric encounters. He came every week with the supply cart, and Elena found reasons to be in the courtyard. She would be drawing water from the well, or hurrying across with an armful of linens, their paths crossing for mere seconds. Sometimes he would manage to slip a small, rough-carved bird or a wildflower, its petals bruised but still vibrant, into her hand as she passed. No words were ever exchanged beyond a hushed sister from him, a nod from her. But their eyes spoke volumes. In his gaze, she saw the reflection of the wide, open world beyond the mountains, the smell of pine forests, the feel of a galloping horse, the taste of untamed air. His dreams of freedom, of a life by the sea where a man was judged by his labor and not his name, became a siren song in her mind. He was passion, he was escape, he was the promise of a future. She was torn, a ship caught between two lighthouses. Amara was the safe harbor in the storm of her grief, a love that understood her scars. Lucien was the wild, beckoning ocean, a love that promised to wash those scars away. She loved them both in different, equally desperate ways. Amara's tenderness made her feel seen for who she was, while Lucien's fierce longing made her dream of who she could become. The tension came to a head on a night of howling wind, the eve of the first snow. Elena met Lucien in the abandoned stable at the far edge of the convent grounds, a place of dust motes and the ghostly scent of hay. The plan had been forming for weeks, whispered in glances and passed on scraps of paper. "We leave tomorrow night," Lucien whispered, his voice tight with urgency. He gripped her hands, his calloused palms warm and real. "I have a horse, supplies. We can make for the coast. We can be free, Elena. No more walls. No more silence." Her heart leaped at the thought, a wild, terrified bird. Freedom. The word was a prayer. But then Amara's face swam before her eyes, her gentle smile, the trust in her brown eyes, the way her presence alone could calm the storm inside her. "I will come," Elena said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her soul. but not without Amara. Lucien's face fell. 2 is danger. 3 is a parade. They will hunt us twice as hard. She comes, or I do not, Elena stated, the ghost of her father's iron will surfacing in her tone. She is part of me, Lucien. I will not leave her to this. He searched her face in the dim light, seeing the unshakable resolve there. Finally, he nodded, a grim acceptance in his forest green eyes. For you, he whispered. For you, I would risk anything. The plan was set. The following night, a moonless void that swallowed the world in ink, they would flee. The 3 of them. Or not at all. The moonless night was a conspirator, its black velvet cloak a shield for their treason. Elena's heart was a drumbeat against her ribs, so loud she was sure it would wake the entire convent. She moved like a wisp of smoke through the familiar corridors, her small bundle of possessions, her mother's silver comb, the carved bird from Lucien, a sprig of dried rosemary from Amara clutched to her chest. She found Amara waiting in their spot in the scriptorium, her face pale and terrified in the light of the single candle. Are you certain? Amara breathed, her hands ice-cold in Elena's. More certain than I have been of anything since they brought me here, Elena whispered back, pouring all her newfound courage into her words. This is not a life, Amara. It is a slow death. Come with us. Please. The plea in Elena's eyes, the raw hope, broke through Amara's fear. She nodded, a single, decisive movement. Slipping through a disused postern gate whose rusted lock Lucien had quietly forced days before, they emerged into the biting cold of the mountain night. The world was a symphony of darkness and wind. Lucien was there, a solid, reassuring shadow holding the reins of a sturdy mountain pony. Without a word, he helped them up, his grip strong and sure on Elena's waist, a touch that sent a jolt of both fear and excitement through her. They moved, a silent, desperate procession into the teeth of the forest that crowded the mountain pass. The pony's hooves were muffled by a thick carpet of pine needles, the wind masking the sound of their passage. For an hour, hope began to bloom, a fragile, intoxicating flower in Elena's chest. They were doing it. They were escaping. It was Sister Bernadette, an insomniac with the hearing of a bat, who raised the alarm. She had gone to the scriptorium for a forgotten psalter and found the candle still warm, the air still stirred by their flight. The bell began to toll, a single, clanging note of doom that shattered the silence of the valley. Ride, Lucien urged, his voice sharp with panic. He slapped the pony's flank, and they plunged forward, branches whipping at their faces, the darkness now a malevolent enemy hiding roots and ravines. Behind them, the baying of hounds joined the clamor of the bell. Torchlight flickered between the trees, drawing closer. They broke from the tree line near a sharp bend in the mountain path, the lights of a distant village twinkling mockingly far below. It was there, in that exposed space, that the arrow found its mark. It came from the darkness with a soft, deadly thrum. Amara, who was sitting behind Elena, gave a small, sharp gasp. Elena felt her go rigid, then slump against her back. "No!" Lucien cried, reining in the pony. In the faint, dancing light of the pursuing torches, Elena turned. An arrow was buried deep in Amara's side, the feathered shaft a grotesque ornament. Her warm blood was already seeping through her habit, staining Elena's back. Lucian leaped down, catching Amara as she fell. He laid her gently on the cold ground. Elena tumbled down beside her, clutching her hand, her own breath coming in ragged sobs. Amara. No, look at me, look at me. Amara's face was as pale as the moon that refused to shine, but her eyes were clear and filled with a profound, heartbreaking love. She looked from Elena's terrified face to Lucian's anguished one. Do not. Stop, she whispered, each word a struggle. Be free. For me. Her gaze locked with Elena's. I love you. It was not a whisper of romance, but a prayer of the soul, a final, sacred benediction. Her eyes held Elena's for a moment longer, then the light in them faded, the warmth seeping from her hand. The gentle novice, the keeper of herbs and secrets, was gone. The torches were almost upon them. Lucian, his face a mask of grief and fury, grabbed Elena's arm. We have to go. No. Her sacrifice cannot be for nothing. Elena's world had shattered for the second time. She allowed herself to be dragged to her feet, her eyes fixed on Amara's still form. Lucian pulled her onto the pony and, with a final, agonized look back at the woman who had given them her life, he spurred the animal forward, leaving the light, the hounds, and the last piece of Elena's heart behind on the dark mountainside. Part 4. The Fugitive and the Noose. The world became a blur of terror and motion. They rode through the remainder of the night, the pony's strength flagging, its breath pluming in ragged gasps. Elena clung to Lucian, her body numb, her mind a hollow echo chamber for Amara's final words. I love you. They were not a comfort. They were a brand, a final, searing indictment of her choices. She had led Amara to her death as surely as Valerius Marcellin had led her mother to the pyre. Dawn broke, a sickly gray smear across the eastern sky, revealing a landscape of harsh, unfamiliar beauty. They were deep in the foothills now, the mountains a jagged wall behind them. The convent, with its silent sorrows and its single, devastating loss, was a world away, yet it clung to them like a shroud. We have to leave the pony, Lucian said, his voice rough with exhaustion. They will be looking for it. His words were practical, necessary, but they felt like another amputation. He led the trembling animal into a thick copse of trees, removing its bridle and slapping its rump to send it wandering. They were truly alone now, two specks against the vast, indifferent wilderness. Their existence became a precarious, hand-to-mouth pilgrimage. They slept in the skeletal remains of a charcoal burner's hut, the roof half gone, the stars their only witness. They huddled in the damp, earth-scented darkness of a badger's set they had enlarged with their hands. They foraged for berries and roots, and Lucian, with a grim efficiency that spoke of a hard life, set crude snares for rabbits. When it rained, they shivered under makeshift shelters of pine boughs, their clothes never truly dry. Elena's fine hands, once accustomed to the smooth texture of parchment and the stems of flowers, grew raw and calloused. Her skin, pale from a year indoors, was weathered by sun and wind. She was shedding the last vestiges of Elena de Veron, but what was emerging was not Sister Evangeline, nor was it the carefree girl from the estate. It was something harder, sharper, a creature of survival haunted by two ghosts. Lucian was her rock, her protector. His quiet strength, which had first drawn her, was now the only thing holding her world together. In the deep of night, when the nightmares came of fire, of falling arrows, he would hold her, his arms a solid barrier against the memories. He spoke little of his own past, but she gleaned pieces, an orphaned childhood, a succession of brutal masters, a life of servitude that had forged his dream of freedom into an unbreakable core. "We'll find a fishing village," he whispered to her one evening as they shared a meager meal of roasted tubers. "Somewhere on the coast, where the king's law is just a rumor. I can work. I'm strong. We can have a little house. You'll never have to be afraid again." His dreams were a lifeline. She would cling to them, painting the little house in her mind, filling it with the scent of salt and the sound of gulls, trying to drown out the scent of smoke and the sound of a tolling bell. Their luck, such as it was, ran out near a small, bustling town called Saint Benoit du Lac. They were desperate, their hunger a sharp-toothed animal in their bellies. Lucien decided to risk trading a beautifully carved fox he had whittled during their travels for some bread and cheese. The market square of Saint Benoit du Lac was a riot of color and noise after the silence of the forest. Peasant women hawked vegetables, the air was thick with the smell of roasting meat and fresh dung, and townsfolk bartered and gossiped. To Elena, it was overwhelming, a cacophony that set her nerves on edge. She kept her head down, the hood of her stolen cloak pulled low, her heart hammering against her ribs. Lucien moved with a purpose she envied, blending into the crowd. She watched from the shadow of a baker's awning as he approached a stall selling wooden toys. She saw him hold out the little fox. She saw the stallkeeper nod, a smile on his face. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to hope. It was then that she saw him, a man in the well-made but travel-stained clothes of a bailiff. He was standing near the town well, his eyes lazily scanning the crowd. They passed over Lucien, then snapped back. A flicker of recognition, then a cold, calculating focus. Elena's blood turned to ice. She tried to catch Lucien's eye, to signal him, but it was too late. The bailiff gestured, and two burly town guards emerged from the throng. "You, stable hand." From the mountain convent, the bailiff's voice cut through the market din. Lucien froze, the carved fox falling from his hand. His eyes met Elena's across the square. In that single, horrifying second, a universe of understanding passed between them. "Run," his gaze screamed at her. She took a step forward, a protest on her lips, but the crowd, sensing drama, surged around her, trapping her. She was a leaf in a current, powerless. She saw Lucien's face harden. He didn't try to run. He knew it was futile. He stood straight, his shoulders squared, as the guards seized him roughly. He did not struggle. His eyes never left hers. It was a look of apology, of love, of a devastating, final goodbye. The trial was a mockery, a swift and brutal formality held in the town's grimy courthouse. The crime, theft of a horse from the Holy Church, and the corruption of a novice. Elena, hidden in the rafters amidst the curious townsfolk, listened as the lies were woven into truth. She heard her name, Sister Evangeline, spoken as a thing defiled. She saw Lucien, standing in chains, refuse to give her up, refuse to speak a word in his own defense. He was protecting her to the last. The sentence was death by hanging. The following morning, the square was packed once more. The scene was a grotesque echo of her past, a nightmare she was forced to relive. The platform, the rough-hewn gallows, the crowd with its same hungry, pitiless eyes. Elena stood at the very back, pressed against the cold stone of a building, her nails digging into her palms until they bled. They brought him out. He walked with a dignity that shamed his captors, his head high. The sun caught the green in his eyes as he scanned the crowd. He was looking for her. He knew she would be there. And he found her. Their eyes met across a sea of faces. In his gaze, she saw no fear, only a profound, unshakable love and a silent plea for her to live, to be free. A tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. She gave him the smallest of nods, a promise. The noose was placed around his neck. The world seemed to hold its breath. The trapdoor fell with a crash that would echo in her soul for the rest of her days. His body jerked, then swung. His eyes remained open, locked on hers, until the light in them was extinguished. As the crowd began to murmur and disperse, the spectacle over, Elena stood rooted to the spot, utterly alone. The warmth of Amara's hand, the strength in Lucien's arms, it was all gone, swallowed by the cold earth and the cold justice of men. She had lost them all. The flames, the arrow, the rope. She was a curse, a widow to love, a creature upon whom the sun of happiness would never truly shine again. She turned and stumbled away from the square, a hollowed-out shell, with no destination in mind, no hope left to guide her. The world was vast, empty, and utterly, terrifyingly silent. Part 5. The Widow's Tavern and the Nobleman's Promise. Elena wandered. Days bled into weeks, a gray, featureless landscape of despair. She was a ghost walking through a living world, untouched by the sun on her face or the rain on her skin. She slept in ditches, sheltered under hayricks, and ate what she could scavenge from fallow fields or steal from unattended kitchen gardens. The refined speech of Elena de Veron had been worn away by hardship, leaving behind a terse, functional silence. She was no one. A pair of eyes to witness the passing of carts, a hollow stomach to feel the pangs of hunger, a heart that was little more than a cold, heavy stone in her chest. It was on a day when the wind carried the first true bite of winter that she saw her again. Elena was huddled in the doorway of a derelict church on the outskirts of a village she did not know, watching the skeletal branches of trees claw at a leaden sky. A figure emerged from the mist, a stain of absolute black against the gray world. The woman. Her face was just as pale and ageless as it had been in the crowd the day her mother died, her eyes holding that same ancient, penetrating knowledge. She did not speak at first. She simply stood before Elena, her gaze sweeping over her from matted hair to torn, muddy shoes. There was no pity in that look, only assessment. "They have all fallen, the ones who loved you," the woman said, her voice low and melodious, a strange, beautiful sound in the desolate quiet. "But you remain. The fire did not take you. The arrow did not find you. The rope was not for your neck." Elena stared, too numb for fear, too broken for questions. "Your path is not yet done, child of smoke and sorrow," the woman continued. "Darkness and light still fight for your soul. The embers of your mother's legacy are not extinguished. They glow within you, waiting for a breath to set them ablaze once more. Do not lie down in this ditch. Your story is not a tragedy. It is a forging." She reached out a hand. not to touch Elena, but to gesture towards the road that led into the village. Follow the river. Look for the sign of the weary traveler. There is a hearth there that does not judge. Before Elena could form a word, the woman turned and seemed to dissolve into the gathering twilight, becoming one with the shadows from which she came. A phantom, a prophet, a final, haunting thread connecting all the tragedies of Elena's life. Driven by an instinct deeper than hope, Elena pushed herself to her feet. She followed the woman's direction, stumbling along a path that ran beside a swift, cold river. As dusk settled, a warm, golden light spilled from the windows of a low, timber-framed building. A creaking sign, painted with the image of a man leaning heavily on a staff, swung in the wind, the weary traveler. The tavern's interior was a blanket of warmth, thick with the smells of stew, wood smoke, and ale. The buzz of conversation faltered for a moment as she entered, a bedraggled, wild-eyed creature from the storm. All eyes turned to her. From behind the scarred wooden bar, a woman looked up. She was in her late 40s, perhaps, with a strong, capable frame and hair the color of faded cinnamon swept into a practical bun. Her face was lined, not with bitterness, but with the quiet resilience of one who has endured much. Her eyes, a calm and steady gray, met Elena's. They were the kindest eyes Elena had seen since Immerse. The woman, Marta, did not ask questions. She took one look at the deathly pallor beneath the grime on Elena's face and the tremor in her hands and simply said, "Sit by the fire, girl. You look like you've seen the other side." She brought Elena a bowl of thick, hearty stew and a hunk of dark bread. Elena ate as if starved, which she was, the hot food a painful, wonderful shock to her system. When she was done, Marta cleared the bowl. "The washing up needs doing. And the floors. You work, you eat, you sleep. No questions asked." Understood. It was not an offer of charity, but of a bargain. It was a language Elena, in her new life, understood perfectly. She nodded. Life in the tavern was a new kind of rhythm, a world away from the convent's silence and the forest's terror. It was a world of hard, honest labor. She scrubbed pots until her arms ached, swept floors, served ale to rough-handed farmers and traveling merchants, and slept in a tiny, clean room under the eaves. Marta was a quiet presence, a woman of few words, but profound practicality. She never pried, but her occasional, gruff kindness, an extra blanket on a cold night, a salve for Elena's chapped hands, was a balm. Weeks turned into a month. The sharp edges of Elena's grief began to blunt, cushioned by the simple, monotonous safety of routine. She began to feel, if not alive, then at least not entirely dead. She was a vessel slowly filling with the quiet, undramatic peace of obscurity. It could not last. One evening, a traveling party of nobility stopped for the night, their fine clothes and loud voices filling the common room. Among them was Lord Tristan de Mirval. He was a man of perhaps 35, with thoughtful brown eyes and a gentle, almost scholarly demeanor that set him apart from his boisterous companions. He observed the room with a quiet curiosity, and his gaze fell upon Elena as she moved between the tables, collecting empty tankards. He watched her for a long time, not with lechery, but with a dawning recognition of something out of place. There was a grace in her movements that scrubbing floors had not erased, an unconscious pride in the line of her neck that spoke of a different life. Later, as the party prepared to retire, he approached her near the kitchen door. "You are not from these parts," he said, his voice soft and cultured. Elena kept her eyes downcast, her heart beginning to race. "No, my lord." "There is a sadness in you," he continued, not unkindly, "and a strength. This is no life for one such as you." He paused, then made his offer, as simple and direct as Marta's had been. "I have an estate to the north. It is peaceful. The work is lighter. The air is cleaner. I could offer you a position there. A new beginning away from all this." Elena looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. She saw no cruelty there, no hidden agenda, only a genuine, compassionate offer. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. To stay was to remain a serving wench in a tavern, forever one drunken patron away from being discovered. To go with him was a risk, but it was a risk that promised peace, comfort, a chance to bury Elena de Veron forever. She thought of the woman in black. "Your path is not yet done." "I will come," Elena said, her voice barely a whisper. She gave her thanks to Marta, who simply squeezed her hand, her wise eyes understanding that some souls are not meant for taverns. The next morning, Elena climbed into the comfortable carriage of Lord Tristan de Mirval, leaving the weary traveler behind. As they rolled away, she caught a final glimpse of the tavern sign, swinging in the breeze. The weary traveler was moving on. The de Mirval estate was everything he had promised. It was not a fortress of grim stone, but a graceful manor of pale honey-colored brick, nestled in a gentle valley of rolling hills and tranquil lakes. The air was cleaner, scented with lavender and damp earth. The silence here was not the oppressive silence of the convent, but a peaceful, contented quiet. Lord Tristan was a kind and undemanding master. He installed her as a companion to his elderly, mild-mannered aunt, a role that required little more than reading aloud and taking walks in the gardens. For the first time in years, Elena slept in a soft bed, wore clean, simple but well-made dresses, and ate regular, nourishing meals. The sharp panic of survival receded, replaced by a numbing, gentle haze. Tristan's affection for her was quiet and patient. He would seek out her company in the evenings, talking of books, of history, of his travels. He never touched her, never made an improper advance. His love, if that was what it was, felt like a safe harbor, a protective cloak. She found herself responding to his gentleness, her frozen heart beginning to thaw in the steady, temperate climate of his regard. It was not the passionate, desperate love she had felt for Lucien, nor the deep, soulful connection she had shared with Amara. It was a feeling of gratitude, of safety, a fragile seedling of something that could, in time, grow into contentment. She began to believe, truly believe, that her story of fire and flight was over, that she had finally reached its quiet, unremarkable ending. She was wrong. The announcement came like a summer thunderclap. The king himself, on a progress through the region, would honor the de Mirval estate with a visit. The manor was thrown into a frenzy of preparation. Elena kept to the background, a silent ghost in the bustling household. The day of the royal visit arrived with a blaze of banners and the clatter of armed guards. She watched from an upper window as the king, a man in his prime with a hawk-like nose and an air of absolute authority, dismounted. That evening, during the grand feast, she was tasked with carrying a tray of sweetmeats to the high table. She moved with her head bowed, hoping to pass unnoticed. But as she placed the tray on the table, the king's gaze, sharp and assessing, fell upon her. It lingered. It was the same look Valerius Marcellin had given her mother, a look of covetous fascination. The word which was a spark on the dry tinder of her soul. The numbness that had protected her for so long cracked, and a white-hot fury, banked for years, flared to life within her. She did not drop her gaze. "Justice," she echoed, her voice low and steady, though her whole body trembled. "You call your envy and your lies justice? You murdered an innocent woman and a good man." Valerius's smile widened. "And yet I stand here, a count in the king's favor. And you're a governess, living on the king's sufferance. Your very existence here is a thread I can snap with a word. One whisper in the right ear, that the daughter of a convicted witch and heretic is influencing the royal bloodline, and you will follow your parents. The boy, too, would be tainted." The threat was real and immediate. He held her life, and Leo's, in the palm of his hand. The old fear, the terror of the fire, threatened to consume her. But as she looked into his smug, victorious face, the fear began to transmute. It did not vanish, it hardened, crystallizing into a cold, sharp purpose. She would not run. She would not cower. Not again. That night, Elena did not sleep. She stood at her window, looking out at the constellations her mother had taught her to name. The hunter, the swan, the dragon. They were the same stars that had shone over her childhood home, over the convent, over the forest where Lucian had held her, over the hill where the woman in black had watched. "Your fire has only begun to burn." The words were no longer a prophecy of suffering, but a call to arms. She had spent her life being acted upon by Valerius's malice, by the Inquisition's cruelty, by the king's whim. She had been a leaf in the storm. But a fire was not passive. A fire acted. It consumed. It transformed. Valerius thought her a helpless ember he could crush. But an ember, fanned by the right wind, could start a blaze that would consume a forest. She began to watch, to listen, not as a frightened girl, but as a strategist. She used her invisibility to her advantage, moving through the palace's servant corridors, lingering in shadowed alcoves outside meeting chambers. She learned the rhythms of the court, its alliances and hatreds. She learned that Valerius, for all his power, had enemies. He was arrogant. His rise had been built on the ruin of others, and there were those who waited for him to stumble. She learned of a particular lord, the Duke of Severian, whose son Valerius had ruined in a duel over a gambling debt. The Duke was a quiet, powerful man who held a deep, abiding hatred for the Count. Elena bided her time. She tended to Leo, her affection for the boy becoming the one pure, untainted thing in her life. She was the perfect, unobtrusive governess. And she waited for her moment. It came during a lavish masquerade ball. The great hall was a swirl of silk and jewels, the air vibrating with music and laughter. Elena was not in attendance, of course, but she had a view from a minstrel's gallery high above the fray. She saw Valerius, resplendent in a costume of a golden eagle, holding court, his voice booming with confidence. She saw the Duke of Severian, dressed as a simple monk, watching him with cold, still eyes. Later, as the night wore on and the wine flowed freely, she saw Valerius stumble into a secluded antechamber, half drunk and accompanied by a few sycophants. This was her chance. Moving like a shadow, she slipped down a servant's stairwell and into the corridor outside the antechamber. She could hear Valerius's voice, loud and boastful. A mere trifle, he was slurring. The de Veron lands? I deserved them. The man was a fool, his wife a tempting piece of heresy. It was almost a pity to burn her. Almost. Elena's breath caught. She pressed herself against the wall. And the king, one of his companions, asked, their voice muffled. Valerius laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Our glorious monarch? He plays at being a lion, but he is led by his appetites. He sees a pretty face and must have it, like that governess. A low-born wench, but there's a fire in her I wouldn't mind taming myself. It was the opening she needed. More than she needed. She waited until his companions had left, leaving Valerius alone in the room, pouring himself another drink. Taking a deep breath, drawing on every ounce of courage she possessed, she stepped into the doorway. He looked up, surprised, then a leer spread across his face. The governess. Come to seek a better patron. I came to see the man who murdered my parents, she said, her voice clear and carrying, devoid of fear. He said nothing to her then. But the following morning, as the royal entourage prepared to depart, a royal steward approached Lord Tristan. Elena, weeding in the herb garden, saw the conversation. She saw the color drain from Tristan's face, saw his shoulders slump in defeat. He found her later, his expression pained. Elena, the king, he noticed you. He was captivated. He has ordered that you be brought to the royal court. He has a need for a new governess for his youngest bastard son. It was not a request. It was a command. The king had seen a beautiful object and had reached out to take it. Tristan, for all his kindness and status, was powerless to refuse his monarch. The safety of the estate, the promise of a quiet life, shattered around her. She was once again a pawn, her fate decided by the whim of a powerful man. As a simple royal carriage, far grander than Tristan's, waited to bear her away, Elena stood alone in the courtyard. She was no longer the terrified girl leaving her home, nor the broken fugitive fleeing the convent. She was a woman who had known love and loss, safety and betrayal. Her gaze was steady, her back straight. Lord Tristan approached, his eyes full of a helpless sorrow. I am so sorry, Elena. Do not be, she said, her voice calm, devoid of the tremor of fear. She touched his hand once, gently, in farewell. Then she turned and climbed into the carriage without looking back. The vehicle pulled away, rolling down the tree-lined drive, its dark shape growing smaller and smaller until it was swallowed by the morning mist. On a hill overlooking the de Mirval estate, the woman in black stood watching. A faint, unreadable smile touched her lips as the carriage vanished from sight. Your fire, she whispered into the wind, has only begun to burn. Part 6. The King's Court and the Ember's Glow. The royal court was a gilded cage, a world of breathtaking beauty and exquisite cruelty. The Palace of Viridia was a sprawling labyrinth of marble halls, vaulted ceilings painted with scenes of gods and heroes, and corridors that echoed with the whispers of 1,000 intrigues. After the earthy simplicity of the tavern and the pastoral peace of Tristan's estate, the air here was thick with the cloying scent of perfume, beeswax, and the constant, underlying tension of ambition. Elena was installed in a small, but elegantly appointed chamber adjacent to the royal nursery. Her charge was a quiet, dark-haired boy of 5 named Leo, the king's unacknowledged son by a minor lady-in-waiting who had died in childbirth. The boy was a lonely, watchful creature, ignored by the court and tolerated by his father. In his large, solemn eyes, Elena saw a reflection of her own isolation. A fragile bond formed between them, built on silent understanding and the simple act of her reading him stories, a small island of calm in the turbulent sea of the court. Her position as a governess made her largely invisible, a piece of the scenery. Yet, she felt eyes upon her constantly. The noble women assessed her with cold, dismissive glances, categorizing her as a harmless servant. The men, however, looked at her with a different kind of interest. The story of her mysterious beauty catching the king's eye had spread, and she became an object of forbidden fascination. She saw the king often, though he rarely addressed her directly. He would visit the nursery, his presence filling the room, his hawk-like gaze sweeping over his son before lingering on Elena. It was a possessive look, the look of a man who had acquired a new and interesting trinket and was deciding when to play with it. She learned to curtsy perfectly, to keep her eyes lowered, to be a phantom of efficiency and grace. She buried Elena de Veron, the fugitive, the tavern maid, the companion, deeper than ever before. Here, she was simply the governess of a role that was both a shield and a prison. It was in this state of heightened vigilance that the past reached out its hand to her once more. She was walking with Leo in the palace's vast topiary garden, the boy chasing a butterfly, when a figure stepped from behind a meticulously sculpted yew tree. Count Valerius Marcellin. He was older, his face more lined with dissipation, his once handsome features coarsened by power and spite. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were exactly the same. A slick, triumphant smile spread across his face. "The de Veron girl," he murmured, his voice like oiled silk. I heard a whisper, a description of a ghost. I scarcely believed it. Yet here you stand. The last ember of an extinguished line. Elena's blood ran cold. She pulled Leo protectively behind her, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The scent of smoke, of the pyre, seemed to fill her nostrils anew. "You have nothing to say?" he taunted softly, taking a step closer. "No curse for the man who delivered justice upon your witch of a mother?" His leer vanished, replaced by anger. "You forget your place, girl." "No," Elena said, her gaze locking with his. "I have finally found it. You are a poison, Valerius. You spread lies and call them truth. You destroy lives and call it justice. But your time is ending. The Duke of Severian knows you cheated his son. The king will soon know you question his strength and call him led by his appetites." Valerius's face went pale. He took a step toward her, his hand rising as if to strike her. "You lying little witch. You have no proof." "Don't I?" she whispered, a small, cold smile touching her lips for the first time. She gestured slightly with her head towards the heavy tapestry that hung against the far wall. From behind it, the Duke of Severian emerged, his face a mask of cold fury. He had heard every word. Valerius stared, his arrogance crumbling into sheer, undiluted panic. The Duke did not even look at Elena. His eyes were fixed on his enemy. "It seems, Marcelin," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "that your tongue has finally written your indictment." Elena did not stay to watch the rest. She turned and walked away, the sound of Valerius's sputtered protests fading behind her. She did not feel triumph, not exactly. She felt a quiet, immense settling, as if a great weight she had carried for half her life had finally been lifted. Epilogue. Count Valerius Marcelin was found dead in his chambers a week later, an official verdict of a sudden apoplexy. The court murmured, but soon moved on to newer scandals. The Duke of Severian never acknowledged Elena's role, but a rare, first-edition book of poetry, the kind her father had loved, appeared in her room one day. A silent thank you. The king's interest in her seemed to wane, his capricious attention captured by a new singer from a distant land. Elena remained at court, the governess to Prince Leo, a fixed point in the shifting tides of favor. She stood once more at her window, this time with Leo asleep in his bed behind her. The sky was clear, the stars bright. She was no longer the girl who had lost everything. She was a woman who had reclaimed her past, not through violence, but through cunning and the quiet, unstoppable force of her own will. She had used the very invisibility the world had forced upon her as her greatest weapon. The woman in black did not appear again. She did not need to. The ember had been fanned. The fire was now her own to control. It would not be a wild, destructive blaze, but a steady, enduring flame, a light to guide a lonely prince, a warmth to guard her own soul, a spark of defiance that would never again be extinguished. In the distance, the bells of the royal city began to toll the midnight hour, their sonorous peals rolling over the palace and the sleeping world beyond. And beneath their solemn song, if one listened very closely, was the faint, eternal whisper of a flame, burning steadily in the dark. And so, Elena's flame continues to burn for now. But the courts of kings are fickle, and shadows linger in the hearts of men. Her story is far from over. If the fire of the flames of innocence has touched you, if you have felt the heat of the pyre, the chill of the convent, and the fragile warmth of a forbidden love, then your journey with us need not end here. At Velvet Valor Romantasy audiobook, we weave tales where heartbreak and destiny collide, where love is a rebellion, and every soul is forged in fire. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story. Let the next epic find you. Leave a like if Elena's courage resonated with you. Let it be a signal fire for other listeners seeking refuge in a great tale. And most importantly, share your thoughts in the comments. We long to hear your voice. Whose fate moved you the most? What destiny do you foresee for Elena at the royal court? Your words are the kindling for our next narrative flame. Until the next chapter, dear listener, may your own story be filled with valor.